Good morning, y'all. We are back with another edition of DNVR Rams Live. As always, I am your host, Justin Michael. Hope everybody is having a terrific Wednesday morning, enjoying their week so far. Been about 5 days since we went live last. It's been chaotic with everything going on. I've obviously been on the road, just got back from Dallas yesterday, covering the Avs. Might be back there this weekend. We shall see. Been a bucket list experience, but I have a new level of respect for business types and anybody that has to hit the road frequently going from city to city. It's exhausting. I've done it a couple of times. And man, you feel it on your body. There's nothing like that home sweet home feeling, especially when the Nuggets are cooking. What a game last night. As electric of a performance as this team's had probably since the finals, in my opinion. That was a blast. Hopefully a little bit of a indication of what's to come with that group. We have a ton to get into today because it's been a couple of days. I've got to talk about Tory Horton landing in Seattle. I think it's a perfect fit. Shout out Jacob Kennedy in the Toyota chat. I know you are stoked about that. Had a couple of Ram fans pre-draft hoping and praying that Tory would land in Seattle. I'll get into why I like the fit with the team. I'll get into the Kubiak connection. I wrote about it a little bit the other day as well. I will also talk about CSU football picking up a significant transfer on the defensive side. St. Francis, edge rusher Paul Tangelo. I love his size. I think physically he should translate well. We'll get into his game a little bit. Kind of talk about what I think is going to be a strength of his and where he could maybe use a little bit of refinement. At the end, we'll get into the 2025 Pac-12 Media Deal, which was recently announced this week, and what that could mean for the future of the conference. I think we are just around the corner here from finding out who the next football edition for the conference will be, as well as who will be broadcasting those games. It seems like the window will probably be 2026 through 2031. Based on what I've read, that seems to be what Octagon is negotiating for the Pac-12 at the moment. But we found out that ESPN, CBS, and the CW will be broadcasting all of the 2025 games. So I'll give some thoughts on that, what it could mean for the future, balancing exposure versus immediate payout, and the kind of the tight balance that the league is going to have to walk here in terms of maximizing their return, but also making sure you're relevant and watchable and easily accessible. So there's a lot that goes into it. I am going to just briefly say my bad for getting a little heated on the last show. I went after a couple of Dion trolls in the Toyota chat, and they got under my skin a little bit. They ruffled my feathers. I won't lie. I try really hard not to do that. That's not the audience that I want to speak to. I want to create content for those that are here for CSU news, not those that are here to troll and to get under my skin. Admittedly, it worked on that day, but I don't want to do that. I just think that there are better ways that I can spend my time. I think there's better content I can deliver to you guys. I am just briefly going to give a couple of thoughts on the NFL draft before we talk about Tory specifically, just because I think there's a lot of fun outcomes for some Mountain West guys. Jalen Royals landing with Kansas City is really exciting. As a Broncos fan, don't love that GNT is a Raider, but I think that's a fit that makes a ton of sense. That's a team that signed or traded for a veteran quarterback in Geno Smith. They're going to try and win now, adding a back like GNT that's so dynamic and who you can lean on. I think that makes a lot of sense for them, even though, again, as a Broncos fan, don't love it. I do love that both Ricky White and Tory Horton landed in Seattle. I think that's a super fun fit. I think it's a good opportunity for both of them in an area that's a position of need for Seattle. You know, they've got Jackson Smith and Jigba, who they drafted a year ago, and they brought in Cooper Kupp in the offseason, who is one of my favorite wide receivers of all time. I think he's an awesome mentor for Tory. but he's aging and he's coming off of, a couple of significant injuries. So I think it's a good opportunity for Tory, and I think there's a chance for him to significantly outplay what the likely expectations will be as a fifth round guy. I'll admit that he did go later in the draft than I would have anticipated. If I had to guess why, it's still probably some doubts from front offices when it comes to Tory's health. I think that he showed enough, in my opinion, in the pre-draft process that he's worth taking a flyer on. I mean, he ran a 4.41 after just barely getting cleared. I thought he looked really fluid at his pro day. I'm not sure exactly how much of an advantage it was to do that, or if it improved his draft stock or hurt him or anything like that. Who knows? There were a ton of scouts there, which obviously was great. But I did think he would go closer to the third or fourth round. So him nearly falling to the sixth round was a bit of a surprise to me. But that's kind of how this process can go. Truthfully, there's not a huge difference in terms of how teams have guys weighed on their board from like a third round pick to a sixth or seventh round pick. Like the gap's not that significant. You're looking for contributors, you're looking for depth pieces at that point. And I do think there are some legitimate concerns about Tory's durability after the last couple of years. I do like that he's put on about 10 pounds. If he can maintain a little bit more mass without sacrificing that speed and agility, I do think it's something that could serve him well. That's one of the things I wrote about the other day. And I guess, maybe I was a little bit too optimistic coming off the knee injury that a team would see how Tory should translate at the next level. But I do think in the end, it could be a perfect opportunity landing with a Kubiak. I just think that we have seen time and time again over the years, the Kubiak family has done right by CSU Rams at the next level. I remember being in elementary school in the early 2000s, and I always kind of had a soft spot for, the Texans when Kubiak was there, and then the Steelers were always kind of kind to Rams as well, with them drafting Joey Porter and Clark Hagan's. Like, there weren't a ton of Rams in the league at the time, so that the fact that so consistently those seem to be places where CSU guys could go to get an opportunity to succeed, I always kind of rooted for him. And, Gary was the offensive coordinator with the Broncos when they brought in Bradley Van Pelt and Cecil Sapp, gave those guys opportunities to make the roster, gave them opportunities to get in the mix a little bit. If you remember back in 06, BVP would come in some essentially like Taysom Hill type sets where they knew he would be running the football, but he scored a touchdown in Arrowhead. I think if Bradley had gone into the league 15 years later, he could have had a significant career, just because teams these days are more open and more willing to be flexible with some of those in-between types. They find ways to maximize skill sets instead of trying to take all players and put them in the same box, which frankly was a dumb way to operate, but that's just kind of how it was forever. But yeah, the Kubiaks have always done right, by CSU guys. And it makes sense given that Klint and Clay both played at CSU. Their youngest brother, Klein, is also a coach in the NFL as well. I believe he went to Rice. He's now the quarterback coach in San Francisco, where Clay was recently named the offensive coordinator. Kind of a fun storyline there with both Kubiak bros coaching in the NFC West. Klint now the offensive coordinator in Seattle after spending a year in New Orleans. Before that, he was in Minnesota as like a passing game coordinator, spent some time with the Broncos as well. And when you look at the track record of both these Kubiaks now, it's a lot like what we used to see from Gary back in the day. Gary gave a chance to BVP, gave a chance to Cecil. Then when he was the head coach of the Texans, I don't think he was the head coach when they drafted David Anderson, but he was the head coach while DA was there for a couple of years. He did draft Shelley Smith. He rejuvenated Joel Dreesen's career after his stint with the Jets didn't pan out, and then he was out of the league altogether in 06, ultimately signs with Gary in Houston in 2007, extends his career by like 6-7 years, and had he stayed healthy, could have been a part of some of those Broncos runs with Gary Kubiak as well. Unfortunately, injuries just kind of cut his career short. But it's highly possible, I guess, that it could all be coincidence, but that would be a little bit of a surprise to me, I guess, just based on the fact that we have 20 years now of a pretty large sample size of Kubiak's doing right by like Rams in the league. And one of the things that I like about this is I would have to assume that Klint is going to understand Tory better as a prospect. He's going to understand, what his skills are because he's been locked into his alma mater. I mean, you look back at when he was with New Orleans, he brought in Dallin Holker. When he was with the Vikings, he gave Ola BC Johnson a shot. I've had multiple conversations with BC about how Klint is basically the reason that the Vikings drafted him and that he was able to, have a nice couple of years there with the Vikes. Unfortunately, another guy whose career was cut short due to injury. But Kubiak has, in a not that long of a time as an NFL coach, has given a lot of guys opportunities. And I just think Tory landing with somebody who's going to understand who he is as a player. It's not just like he watched him one time on a film cut up and sure, we'll give this guy a chance. Like, he's going to understand how to put Tory in a position to maximize his skill set. And I said it a couple of times going into the draft, but I don't personally believe this is the deepest receiver class. There's a couple of guys that I like a lot, but I don't think there's a ton of true starting outside wide receivers in this year's class. And I think Tory, when healthy, is somebody that can be that. I mean, especially if he can maintain a little bit of size. Like I said, he certainly runs well enough. He's complete enough in terms of his route running, the hands. He's a willing pass blocker. He'll play special teams. He'll do all the little things behind the scenes. That in terms of how he's going to carry himself, Tory will be a coach's dream. He's going to practice hard. He's going to be locked in when it comes to film. He's one of the hardest workers I've ever been around. And I think the fact that he was able to get cleared in time to run at the combine, given when his knee injury took place this fall, is a testament to that. There's tangible proof of his work ethic. And, that Jay Norvell and all the CSU staff was certainly, just speaking the highest of praises throughout this process, which again, I thought that would ultimately allow him to go a little bit higher than he did. But I think Seattle is a great spot for him and a chance where he has an opportunity to make a name for himself. I think it's a place where, you don't have a ton of established receivers at the moment. We'll see how Cooper Kupp is able to produce coming off of the injuries. We'll see if Jackson Smith-Njigba can make a leap in year two. But I think there's an opportunity to early playing time for Tory, and I think his game translates to the next level. I do think you can line him up outside or inside, but the fact that he can be like a true starting outside wide receiver, a 3-down type guy that can make plays for you up and down the field. I'm really excited about him landing in Seattle, and I'm really excited about him landing with the Kubiak. I know that's a little bit of a CSU angle, but again, like, we've got 20 years now at this point of seeing them do right by next level Rams. And as Taylor says here in the Toyota chat, is the NFC West the most pro Rams division in the NFL? I think it's tough to argue at this point. We've got, Trey with the Cardinals. They also gave Manny Jones an opportunity the other season, excuse me, a couple of seasons ago would have been a better way to phrase that. But in San Francisco as well, they signed Drew Moss. They also invited Jack Howell to rookie mini camp. Got a list here with where all the other Rams landed. And Drew Moss with the Niners. Dom Jones signed with Cleveland. If you were locked into the pod kind of leading up to the draft, I said on a couple of occasions, outside of Tory, I feel like the guys that have the best chance to have potentially a sustained NFL career are those two guys, Drew Moss and Dom Jones. Dom Jones has got the size and the length. He really showed a lot in press situations this past year, which I think he's going to have an outside chance to make the team or at least stick around with the franchise. He moves well. He's a good athlete. I'd heard at one point his intent was to go into MMA and not play professional football. But I suppose if you are playing as well as he did this past year and you're going to have an opportunity to make some serious money playing the game, why not give it a shot? Drew Moss signing as a UDFA makes a lot of sense. I thought he had an outside chance to be a day 3 pick. He's a guy who he's a little handsy. He had some significant holding calls this past year, but he's also a beast. And I think his frame, his strength, it should translate well. I'm not surprised again that Those guys landed with another Kubiak in San Francisco. So the Kubiak connection paying off significantly for CSU. Jack Howell with San Francisco. Henry Blackburn gets an opportunity at rookie minicamp with the Broncos. Maybe he can play his way into a training camp invite, something like that. Jacob Gardner with Indy, Peter Montini with Cleveland, Avery Morrow and Isaiah Sissoma both get rookie minicamp invites with the Giants. The truth is a lot of guys get invited to these camps just to be bodies. So just because you have a rookie mini camp invite doesn't necessarily mean, by the time July rolls around, you're going to be in the mix, on a roster heading into preseason. But if you make the most of your opportunity, it is a chance where you can potentially earn that shot. So rooting for all those guys. We'll give a couple more thoughts on this, and then we'll move on to the latest recruiting news for CSU football. We are going to take just a brief break here and shout out a couple of our partners.
Sorry about that, J-Mike. Didn't mean to scare you.
No, all good. It's all good. Keeping me on my toes. Live TV, baby. With Empire today, you get shop at home convenience, the right product for your need, quick and professional installation, plus a price match guarantee. Empire today is the best place to get new flooring. They're not going to advertise the lowest price on the market, because anybody that does that, they're just trying to sell you junk. They're trying to sell you flooring they wouldn't put in their own home. Empire, their focus is on quality, on service, on speed, but most importantly, it's on getting you the right product for your home. They want to make sure they're going to get you flooring that lasts. They're not trying to overwhelm you with thousands of choices and substitutes like some places do. They're just showing you the best of the best. What they don't include in their selection, honestly, just as important as what they do include. Their virtual floor designer, it's a great way to see how any new floor will look in any space. You just snap a picture. Boom. How's this going to look in my bathroom? Maybe you want to put hardwood in the bedroom because you're tired of vacuuming. Who knows? You've got all kinds of options, and their virtual floor designer is a great way to see it. Schedule a free in-home estimate today. All listeners can get a $350 discount. All you got to do is use the promo code DNVR. Restrictions do apply. See empiretoday.com/DNVR for details. I also encourage you to choose chill, like our friends at Coors Light do. Between work, social media, trolls online, it's easy to get worked up. We don't want to let the outside noise ruin our chill. I did let the outside noise ruin my chill last week. It's a constant work in progress, right? Some days you win, some days you lose. But I just try and stack more wins than losses. And it's all about the little things. Sometimes it's got to just get outside, get some exercise, get a little bit of fresh air. I've been cooped up in hotels and airplanes and stuff. It's tiring, but I get home, spend a little time in sunshine, maybe walk the dog, puts me in a great state of mind. Then I'm going to kick back and I'm going to chill, and I'm going to crack open an ice cold Coors Light when the mountains turn blue. It's as cold as the Rockies. Cold lagered, cold filtered, and cold packaged for that smooth finish. Choose chill this winter, then reach for a Coors Light. Get Coors Light delivered straight to your door by visiting CoorsLight.com/DNVR, or you can find it pretty much anywhere that sells beer. Celebrate responsibly. Coors Brewing Company, Golden, Colorado. Speaking of Coors Light, had one in a bottle recently. There's something about that. There's something about the vibe of a Coors Light with a bottle that I like even more than the can. I know that the can and the mountains turning blue, that's their thing, and it's a really cool feature. All about that, but it's a vibe when you got a bottle. It makes me feel like I'm Chuck Norris and Walker Texas Ranger or something. Couple of final thoughts on the NFL draft, and then we'll move on to the latest recruiting news. Talk about Paul Tangelo, highly intriguing edge rusher. I said a couple of times that I felt like CSU could use a little bit more pass rushing depth. I think he's a significant addition, and I'm going to give my thoughts on him. Obviously, there was a lot of attention on this NFL draft, a lot of hot takes, a lot of people trying to paint things in black and white, trying to create narratives. There's a lot of conspiracies, a lot of just silly takes, in my opinion. And, I think that this draft was a perfect example of how much groupthink there is when it comes to coverage, especially with like mock drafts and my good friend Kevin Sweeney of Sports Illustrated actually had a great couple of tweets about this the other day, and I thought it was a tremendous point, and I agree with him completely. Everybody's so scared of, being honest with what their eyes are seeing. If it doesn't match up with, what everybody else is saying, nobody is willing to be all that bold because you don't want to get mocked. Nobody wants to be the guy on Twitter that after the draft is getting memed because, they said he was going to be a day 3 pick and everybody else, projected him in the first round and that's where he went. But if you listen to a lot of the pre-draft content from people that I consider to be experts, the writing on the wall was there. And I said a lot of times going into the draft that I didn't think the quarterback out of Boulder would ultimately go in the top 10, like so many of their fans confidently shouted at me for months. And while he certainly fell further than I would have anticipated, I don't think this is an instance of the NFL trying to make an example out of a player or something like that. I do think that it's pretty clear the pre-draft process matters and how you conduct yourself and the image that you give off to these teams. Like, if the juice isn't worth the squeeze, you kind of have to fall in line, especially if you're not widely projected to be like a starter in the league. The truth is, you don't want to ruffle too many feathers. And I just think it was an instance of somebody overplaying their hand, and the NFL made it clear like what they really think here. And we'll see how this all plays out. I think that Shedeur was an above average college quarterback. I've said a bunch of times, Travis Hunter, I think, is a generational talent. He should have an opportunity to compete at least for playing time in Cleveland and what is now the weirdest quarterback room of all time. But like what I said earlier, in terms of not being a huge difference between like a third round pick and, a fifth, sixth, seventh round pick, there's just some processes to this draft that are pretty consistent now. And one of those is that if you're not a first round quarterback, where you get the 5th year option on the contract, which is why so many teams reach on some of these quarterbacks in the first round, is if you're going to be willing to invest that type of draft capital in them, you want to be able to get that 5th year option that you get with a first round pick that you don't get with the second or third round. If you're not a day 1 quarterback, for the most part, and there are outliers, but for the most part, you're going to be a day 3 quarterback because you're looking for starters in the second and third round. And obviously there are a couple examples of outliers there, but that's just kind of how this process plays out these days. And it's not the same draft that it was. And if you learn anything from this, it's that the highlights don't matter. You can put up big stats. You can do this. Oh, he was great in this game that I watched on a Friday night. It doesn't matter to NFL teams. A lot like recruiting, where just about everybody that gets a Division I offer was dominant at the high school level. All these guys were good at the collegiate level. That's why they're in the mix to go to the NFL. It's about how your traits are projected to translate. And yes, it is a little bit of a crapshoot process. There are teams that miss, but I think teams are right about quarterbacks and how they'll translate more often than they're wrong. And maybe I'm giving too much credit to NFL teams in that regard, but I just think it's silly that so many people came out and tried to be like, this is the NFL trying to blackball, one person. Dude, Tyreek Hill's still in the league. Like, we saw video of Joe Mixon punching a woman. And I'm not defending this, but my point is that if NFL teams think that you can play, if they think you're going to make an impact at the next level, they'll bring you in. And the whole argument that this is all because his last name is Sanders and just the silliest takes you've ever heard. It's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. And it's not surprising, especially given the fact that nobody's allowed to be critical around here. The local media has just completely bent the knee. They kiss the ring because everybody's scared of getting Sean Keeler treatment. He was the one guy that was willing to be critical around there. And obviously, look how that worked out for him. I'm not saying that I'm shocked that that's how it's played out in terms of the coverage and the noise. Like, Deion gets to dictate 100% of the narrative, but we saw here that that doesn't always line up with reality. So that's my thoughts on all of it. I'm not even trying to do this from a trolling standpoint. I have been on our draft coverage for 6 years. This is a process that I follow pretty closely, trying to shoot straight with you guys and give my thoughts on a relevant local story. But man, it was wild. It was wild how all of this played out. I would be a liar if I said that I didn't enjoy it. I'm a CSU guy. Like that's just the reality. But I just think that there were a lot of disingenuous takes, probably both ways. There are people who had axes to grind with Shedeur too, and I don't personally feel that I am one of those people. But interesting how all of it played out nonetheless. All right, let's move on. Let's talk about the latest pass rusher. Jacob in the Twitter chat says the Browns prove that no one passes on the Boulder quarterback 5 times. No one. You're going to get me in trouble, guys. We're going to stir up the trolls again. I'm trying to keep this professional, trying to not get in any heated debates like we did the other day. Let's move on. Let's talk recruiting. Let's talk about a big-time pickup for CSU football in Paul Tangelo. Comes over from St. Francis, spent a year at Lackawanna Community College before that. I'm drawing a blank on if that's in one of the Mississippi JUCOs or part of the Kansas League. I think it's part of the Jayhawk Conference. I'm trying to draw back to my Last Chance U knowledge. I know that's definitely a name we heard in there a couple of times. He's got great size. You look at the frame, 6'3", 234 pounds. Should just be a true stand-up edge rusher for CSU. I like the production. 10 tackles for loss, 7 sacks this past season. His freshman year at Lackawanna CC, he had 6.5 sacks and 3 forced fumbles, 5 forced fumbles over the last 3 years, and that's not surprising to me on a couple of different levels. Obviously, the size is overwhelming, particularly at that level, and I do think when you watch his film, I'll say in quotations, not a ton of St. Francis clips out there, but from what I've seen from him, and these are obviously mostly going to be his best moments that he's putting out and sharing, he tends to out physical guys. He tends to, use his long arms, which kind of give me Shaq Barrett vibes when you see his frame. He's maybe not the lean Von Miller, even like a Kennedy McDowell type body that we've seen of late, and that's not a perfect comparison, but these days, edge rushers, they can be at least a little bit thinner, a little bit leaner. Quickness has become such a priority in the NFL because of the speed of the game. I like that Tangelo is a little bit of a throwback. I think the Rams have a couple of quick guys, and it's not like he's slow off the snap or anything like that. Like, I like what I see. He's got a quick first step, and when he's able to get those long arms on you, he's really able to drive guys back. I do think he'll need to refine some things. You look at most of the times he's creating plays in the backfield, it's kind of just him bull rushing folks and putting them on a sled and driving them back, and then to his credit, he's able to make the play afterwards. I think he's a sure tackler. Not a ton of clips of him in run stopping situations, but I think he had 41 tackles. From what I could see, seems to have good instincts. Seems to be fairly rangy from sideline to sideline. So, he's 6'3", 234, but I think he carries it well. I think he moves pretty well for a guy of his size. Now, if he can refine a couple of things, learn a couple of pass rushing techniques, some hand movement type stuff, I think there's an opportunity for him to be a pretty productive player for CSU, and I'm really excited about him. We're going to keep talking about him here in just a second. We are going to take one more quick break and shout out a couple of our other partners. After that, we will get into some media ride stuff, all that. Trucks have always been a part of Toyota's DNA. For generations, Toyota's built durable legends destined for greatness and perfect for Colorado. Whether you're conquering off-road trails or if you're hauling the weight of the world, there's a Toyota truck that's just right for you. Check out the Tacoma or the Land Cruiser. Toyota has 17 models with available all-wheel drive or four-wheel drive like the Epic 4Runner. They also offer more low and zero-emission vehicles combined than any other automaker to give customers numerous choices to reduce their carbon footprint. Lost my spot there, but I was able to recover. 16 hybrid vehicles to choose from, like the Tundra iForce Max hybrid truck. Not to be outdone, though, Toyota SUVs take command on the road and on the trail, so you can explore the road less traveled without sacrificing smooth city rides in SUVs like the RAV4 and Grand Highlander. Toyota is a proud partner of CSU Athletics. They're also the official vehicle of DNVR. Toyota, let's go places. We've got some big and little news to share over at the ALLCITY network. We at DNVR, along with all of our other markets, are teaming up with Big Brothers, Big Sisters of America for an exciting 3-year partnership. This isn't just about sports. Sports are everything to us, but so is community. And together we are combining Big Brothers, Big Sisters' incredible youth mentoring programs with the passion and power of ALLCITY's local sports coverage to create something truly meaningful. This is one of the cooler things we've done at DNVR. The partnership just kicked off this past week. Doesn't stop there. We're going to be working year-round to support Big Brothers and Big Sisters through fundraising, through content, events, opportunities with our team, and more. Maybe even some of you guys could get directly involved if you're interested. Again, really, really cool opportunity. We're excited to support youth mentorship, and they really make a difference. You can learn more and see how to get involved at bbbs.org/allcity. Again, that's bbbs.org/allcity. Really cool. I'm very excited about this. We've got a lot of great partners and a lot of great companies that have been involved with DNVR and now the greater ALLCITY network since the beginning. This is one of the cooler things we've done, and I think it's going to be pretty powerful, and I'm excited to get involved in the community myself. Getting back on what we were talking about, again, we're currently speaking on Paul Tangelo, St. Francis transfer that recently committed to CSU. 6'3", 234 pounds, 10 tackles for loss, 7 sacks this past season. He fills a position of need for CSU. I said on a couple of different instances that I was a little bit worried about the depth at edge rusher. I think that Jaquez Evans, who came over from Baylor prior to that, was at Western Kentucky under Tyson Summers, so obviously now reunited in Fort Collins. I think he's a stud. I think he's going to be one of the most important additions from this past offseason. Everything that I've seen, everything that I've heard as well behind the scenes, this guy is exactly what the Rams needed. He definitely passes the eye test physically. He's charismatic. We played an interview with him on the podcast recently. The man that goes by Donut. I really enjoyed getting to know him just a little bit, and I'm excited to cover him throughout the season. I think there's an opportunity for somebody like Kennedy McDowell, who unfortunately has had some injuries these past couple of years, but has flashed when he's been on the field, especially in pass rushing scenarios. I think Kennedy could be in line to make a pretty big leap this year. If you are going to call games as aggressively as Tyson does, and he is a DC that doesn't hold back, they're going to send significantly more pressure than what we saw under Freddie Banks. You're going to need to be able to rotate pass rushers so that they can stay fresh. That the quickness is obviously a big part of getting to the quarterback. And if you've only got 2 guys that you're just going to rock out there for, 60 plus snaps, it's going to be tough. And I just think that adding somebody of Tangelo's size and experience is going to be big for CSU. And I would be really surprised if he doesn't play early and often for the Rams. Some of that has to do with just the fact that you don't have a ton of depth. You lost a couple of guys that you would have hoped could have, been impactful pass rushers for you. And Newer Gatkuth and goodness gracious, drawing a blank on the other kid that went to Wake Forest. Don't know how I'm drawing a blank. Help me out in the Toyota chat. I just think that I think that he's somebody that can come in day one and really make a big impact for you. Sure tackler, rangy, and yeah, he'll need a little bit of refinement. Kershke, good Lord, that broke my brain for a second. But I think he can come in, and I think he's going to translate well. And I compared his frame to Shaq Barrett. I don't want to put those type of expectations on him. Shaq obviously was the Mountain West Defensive Player of the Year, ultimately went on to, kill it with the Broncos, and then, really killed it with Tampa Bay. I'm hoping that he's kind of able to get it back going here in his second NFL stint. But I think Tangelo is somebody who passes the eye test, and I'm excited to see when he gets to campus. I think he's an important addition. They just needed another guy. Honestly, I'd like to see them potentially add another edge rusher if they could. They tend to cost a lot of money, so we'll see kind of on what happens there. In terms of some potential other moves, because I assume the folks would be curious about some other position groups where the Rams could maybe afford to improve the depth a little bit. I do think they could use another veteran receiver. I've said that a couple of times, so I won't get too repetitive. But obviously, you came into the season expecting Lewis Brown to be a major contributor. You hoped that Kojo and Twee could come over from Ohio State and make an impact. Kojo suffered an Achilles injury, unfortunately, so we'll see if he's even back on the field this fall or not. Not sure if it's a full tear or something where it's more like a strain. We'll kind of have to see how that plays out. But he's certainly not in position to be a contributor as of right now. Armani Winfield was dinged up, so I mean there are some guys that could potentially be in the mix in Antwi and Winfield, but just not having Lewis Brown, who's probably going to be your number one receiver, he would have given you a little bit more size out there as well. I'd like to see them add another big-bodied guy. I do think that Tay Lanier and a couple of these other guys have an opportunity to pop, but if you could bring in a veteran, it wouldn't hurt. Excited about the 2 tight end sets. We've talked about that a lot. I think the backfield is in a great spot. I think there's a lot of weapons for BFN, despite the receiving core on paper maybe not being the flashiest or the sexiest. Like I think Jordan Ross and Tommy Maher are guys that are going to be really dependable. They're going to make plays. They get open. You could just use a little bit more size, especially when it comes to run blocking and that type of stuff. Again, I do think they'll lean on those 2 tight end sets a lot because of that. I could see them potentially pursuing another interior defensive lineman. That's another position group that's pretty tough to land in the portal. If you're even remotely capable of playing at this level, they kind of just get stockpiled in the SEC. But it wouldn't hurt to get another interior D lineman. I think Lorich is in line for a big year. I'm really excited about him. But you could use a little bit more depth there. And then I've said this, I think, basically every time we've talked about position groups, but I do wonder if the starting kicker is on the roster or not. I also wonder if maybe Hansen is the punter and the kicker. We'll kind of have to see how that all plays out. But that'll be something to keep an eye on here as we get closer to the fall. And obviously we'll really go in depth on all these position groups. We'll really set the scene and preview the positions and everything once we get a little bit closer to fall camp. We're getting to kind of the quiet part of the off season, which is needed for me. Honestly, I'm running on fumes at the moment, just with everything I've been doing, but also football will be here before we know it. And I'll be stoked. I'll just got to recharge the battery a little bit, and we're gonna have a lot of fun and looking forward to it. I'm also looking forward to getting some off-season content. Great comment in the Toyota chat from Ram Hill. Sorry, I meant to get to that. Really hoping BFN takes a big step forward this season. He says people tend to be too hard on him. I agree with you. I think that the noise and the criticism goes too far. I think a lot of times there's a lot like what we said, when we were talking about the draft stuff. People try and paint things as black and white. You're either the GOAT or you're trash. And we can't even have an honest conversation these more. Everything has to be a hot take. And I think that's kind of a product of social media and how communication works on there. It's really not about back and forth. It's not about establishing a rapport. It's just, here's my thought, here's my take, boom, put it out into the universe, move on to the next thing. It's really not anybody trying to have an honest conversation. They're just trying to get their takes off. I think there's a lot of people that have oversimplified things with Braden. How he didn't play well in the bowl game. I don't think that that's necessarily his fault. He had a couple of bad picks, but I mean, look at the receiving core that he was out there with. The offense was in a bad spot. You had guys that quit on the team. And, I know nobody's allowed to criticize the portal and any of that, but it put him in a bad spot. And that was after already coming into the year and expecting to be able to depend on Tory. Like a lot of the passing offense was designed around Tory being a significant contributor. And we saw that when he was out there. Unfortunately, just got hurt, and it messed everything up. I think the scheme changes are a big factor with not having the same types of big plays down the field. They didn't really give him that many opportunities to stretch the field last year, and some of that probably had to do with personnel. We'll see how much faith, the staff has in the receivers this year, and whether that kind of changes the mindset and the way that the plays are called. We'll also see who is calling the plays, come September. I reported a couple of months ago that I had heard it was going to be Matt Mumme taking over the play calling responsibilities. I have not heard anything that goes against that based on what my sources are telling me. It's been a weird thing publicly. I was on the Ram Nation show a couple of weeks back, and they actually ended up being a double interview with Braden Fowler Nicolosi. They asked him about that. BFN said he wasn't sure what he was allowed to say publicly. And that kind of goes in line with what I've said now for a couple of months, which is they're being a little bit coy about all of it. I'm not entirely sure why. Maybe they feel it's a strategic advantage to not have that information put out. Maybe it's not set in stone. Maybe it's going to be a collaborative effort. We shall see. But I do think that Matt Mumme, in his new role as passing game coordinator, will at least have a larger role in what the plays are being called. And I do anticipate he will be the play caller. And until I say otherwise, that's where I stand with all of it. We'll see how all of that, potentially impacts Braden. I think he's somebody who has next level arm talent. I think he's also somebody who's shown the ability to pull off the spectacular. Some of those throws that he's made against Boise State, Middle Tennessee. I mean, he had a couple of gorgeous throws, in the Wyoming win this past year. He's had some big moments. The big key is obviously consistency and him taking things to the next level. If he's able to do that, I think this offense can be really dangerous, because I do think they've got a great backfield. I think they've got guys that can make plays out wide. I think they've got a couple of potential all-conference caliber tight ends. Now, we'll see how the offensive line holds up. I haven't had any concerns based on the small sample size I saw in spring. Again, probably wasn't there as often as I normally would be, just because the Avalanche stuff. But I do think that they're in a good spot. I'd like to see them maybe add another guy or two just for the rotation. You could use a swing tackle. We'll see what happens with all that. But I think that there's an opportunity for Braden potentially to have a pretty big season. He's played a lot of football at this point, which is big. The continuity there is hopefully going to be a big asset, for that CSU offense. And we'll see. But I do think that people are too hard on him at times. It's not as if he's above criticism. All players are. And especially when you're the quarterback, fair or not, you're often going to be under a microscope. When things are going well, you're going to be the guy that everybody props up and credits the success to. If the offense is struggling, whether there are legitimate personnel issues, whether there are elements of the scheme that are limiting the big play potential, the quarterback is going to get the blame when people Google the box score and they see, he went, 16 of 22 for only 240 yards. What's the deal? This guy must suck. We oversimplify things, and we always have. We probably always will. But I try and at least add some of this important context, and you guys can form your own opinion. It's not like I'm telling anybody that like there haven't been moments where he hasn't been able to deliver, but that's going to be the case with any quarterback. And I do think that we've seen the ability in some pretty big moments where he really shines bright. And I'm hoping that if they can find a little bit more consistency with the passing offense, it puts them in a position where he doesn't have to pull off some crazy comeback like he did against Boise State and like he did against Utah State. But man, when he turns it on and they get in a rhythm and they can go tempo and they can, pressure teams, I think the Rams are dangerous. And I'm really interested to see how aggressive CSU is on both sides of the ball this year, because I don't think they played scared necessarily last season, but I think they were very clearly trying to shorten the game. And that wasn't really the mentality that Norvell had at Nevada. Historically, that's not the way they called things, when he was like at Oklahoma and Texas and Nebraska. I think he's more, at least historically, along the lines of somebody that believes in putting the pressure on teams. And I don't think he felt like they could hold up defensively. And there's some proof in that, because we saw how explosive the passing offense was in 2023. And oftentimes, the defense would then just allow the opposing offense to go right down the field. I think he was trying to prevent some of those frustrating losses like they had against UNLV and Hawaii and CU in 2023, where the offense, lights it up, puts big points on the board, and the defense can't get stops because they just don't have the guys. They don't have the depth. It's a lot of moving pieces. It's a lot of new parts on the defense. So we'll kind of see how quickly everybody can come together. But I do think that they're athletic, especially, Tangelo coming over and Jacquez Evans, who I'm excited about. I think they've added some significant speed and athleticism in the secondary. I like the corners that they brought in. I think they've got some young guys like Jet Vincent, like AJ Noland, who can be big contributors, at safety. And obviously you're hoping somebody like Aiden Hector can kind of be solid for you, one of the more experienced pieces. I like the direction of the roster going into the summer. We'll see what kind of moves shake out between now and then. But I would say I'm cautiously optimistic going into a season where the expectations will be high. I don't think the schedule is unmanageable. I do think it's going to be challenging. I think, Washington State, those are tough non-conference games. Even somebody like UTSA coming into Fort Collins, that's been a really competitive program in recent years. Air Force closed the season pretty strong last year. Even Wyoming, as pathetic as their offense looked in the border war in Fort Collins, they showed a lot of fight in those two games after, against Washington State and Boise State. I thought you could have put a fork in them, that they were going to roll over and be done. But I think the way both Air Force and Wyoming fought at the end of the season was admirable. And I expect, both of those teams to be competitive, be in the mix in the Mountain West. And it was great that you finally beat both of them in the same season for the first time since, I think, 2013. But now you've got to take things to the next level. We've talked about this repeatedly. The standard has been elevated, and I think there's real aspirations from CSU as a university to swim in some significant waters when it comes to athletics. And I think obviously with the Pac-12 stuff, looming, there's a real pressure for basically last year to be the floor. Like, that can't be the ceiling. It's the best season CSU has had as a program since 2017 because it's just been so god awfully miserable for a couple years now. But that can't be it. It's not mission accomplished. We did it, Joe. It's not that. It's all right. We have stabilized the program. Jay Norvell inherited a dumpster fire and probably even bigger challenge than he would have anticipated. I think he saw the facilities. I think he knew CSU's history. He's obviously a football purist, has been around the game for a long time, well aware of everything that happened here in the 90s under Sonny Lubick. He knew what CSU could be. I don't know if he knew quite the level of baggage that he was inheriting with this program. Like, I've talked about expectations with the fan base and how it's a tricky spot because we have seen what CSU can be. So even though it's maybe not necessarily as realistic to sustain the type of success in Fort Collins that was sustained under Sonny Lubick because of the portal, because of a lot of different things. Continuity was obviously such a big strength for those programs back in the day. I do think that it is fair to say that CSU has not come close to what it could be and what it should be. And there was just this major missed window to, take things to the next level post Jim McElwain. There was some fluky stuff that happened early in the Bobo tenure. I think if they win a couple of those Power 4 games that they blew, his entire tenure probably goes different. Probably also gets poached by a bigger school, and then who knows how all of that ends up shaking out. But you had this window coming off of the success under McElwain, and once it was announced that an on-campus stadium was coming, that was really when you needed to strike. And they just completely blew it. They just completely blew this golden opportunity. You've got another significant window here coming up over these next 5, 6, 7 years. There will be some more movement in terms of realignment and all that in the future. Now is when you have to be relevant. Now is when you have to succeed at the highest level. And when you have these opportunities to get a big win on a national stage, you've got to take advantage. And I think some of the comments John Weber has made, talked about basketball and how huge it was for the university to not only, go to the NCAA tournament, to not only, be somebody that made noise in the Mountain West tournament, to then, follow it up with success and, to beat a team like Memphis. There's just nothing more valuable from an exposure standpoint. And I think that's a good way to translate here, or to a transition here into the final segment, which is, it seems like the Pac-12 Media Deal should come together pretty soon. If you missed it, the Pac-12 announced that they do have a deal for all the Oregon State and Washington State games. They will be broadcast on CBS. CW and ESPN actually will be showing a couple of Oregon State games this season as well. Interesting that it's those three. My instant reaction is that I love that the CW is still involved. I know that people cracked jokes when there were ACC and Pac-12 games on there, but I think it's a tremendous opportunity because it's a channel that everybody gets with basic cable. That's usually I think it's like channel 2, so it's easy to find. And one of the things that's been tough about CBS Sports Network, about FS1, is you don't necessarily always get that in just like a standard cable package. CBS Sports Network, usually you have to go up at least one sports tier, if not two, with basic cable. It does seem like it comes a little bit more standard with like Fubo and some of those streaming options, which I finally switched to after years and years of battling it out. But even that's, can be a handful because you don't get they don't have like TNT or TBS. They don't have the Turner channel. So you have to have Max. It's never been so annoying to be a sports fan and try and consume everything. And I think one of the things that's going to be really important with how all this pans out with the Pac-12 is you have to be accessible. It can't be a situation where you have to jump through hoops and do all these things just to be able to watch the games. Based on what I have read, it seems like exposure is going to be a really big factor here. It's not just who is the highest bidder. Because if that's the case, you could see something like Apple. And I honestly think there's an argument that it would be smart to lean into where the future of sports consumption seems to be heading, which is the streaming model. But at the moment, especially because the TV contracts are still so insanely massive, despite the fact that cable subscriptions are dwindling, sports are really the only thing keeping cable alive at the moment. Sports and news. You've got to have some games there, and being on CBS, being on ESPN, being on CW, I think that would be great, especially if you also have the capability to stream on Paramount Plus and Max if you're on the CW, stuff like that. I'm very optimistic about where all this is heading. I've heard some good things. It sounds like the schools are encouraged by the direction that this is heading. I think they're going to get a good media rights deal. I think they're going to get significantly more than the Mountain West. I know there's been a lot of trolling, a lot of just really ignorant takes about all of this. Oh, they should have just merged. Oh, they're the same league. No, they're not. And the broadcast values will make that very clear here. I do think that the fact that CBS is involved with the Pac-12 is interesting, because to me that indicates CBS would rather stay with the Pac-12 and not the Mountain West. Fox not being in the picture, maybe they assume a larger share of the Mountain West games moving forward post 2025. I don't know. No situation is going to be perfect. We've had Mountain West games on CBS Sports Network for years and years. From a football standpoint, don't have as many issues. From a basketball standpoint, the way they schedule things is frustrating because you're often missing the beginning of the game. I don't love that. I do think the quality of their broadcasts is great. I love that they're in person. Fox will do remote broadcasts far more frequently than CBS. I think they've got great commentators. I think they're invested in the league. But again, it's one of those channels that's tougher to get on a sports package. They do have some wonky scheduling stuff. ESPN is great, especially if you're on ESPN and ESPN2. That's tremendous exposure. And maybe you could sell, Friday night games on ESPN or something like that. I think that could be great. But if ESPN is going to be as involved as they are with, the Big 12, and a lot of the games are going to end up getting pushed aside for some of those bigger leagues, and it's just going to be on ESPN Plus, I wouldn't love that at all, especially from a basketball standpoint. I watch a ton of college basketball, I watch a ton of college football. it's great that everybody has access to ESPN Plus these days, but it's also tends to be pretty crappy broadcast quality. So again, like there's pros, there's strengths, but if you're on ESPN, you're on those main channels, that's a great opportunity. But I really think that one of the things that could benefit the Pac-12 is being open to TV stations like the CW and being creative and leaning into some opportunities where you can maybe reach some audiences that wouldn't have been tuned in otherwise. There's all those TV shows on the CW and people make jokes, but it's a channel that a lot of people watch. And maybe, younger audiences, they're watching the Flash or, one of the shows that they have on there. And then all of a sudden, CSU Boise State is on. And I guess I'll give it a shot. Like, you just never know. To me, having an opportunity to be more accessible would be a big win. Now, obviously, you need to reach a certain level in terms of the financial return you're getting for all this, but I'm really excited. And one of the things that I do think is going to be fun to follow is obviously who the next edition is. And in the Pac-12 statement where they put out all this info, one of the things that was highlighted in there is that the Pac-12 will add another member for 2026. We knew this wasn't a secret or anything like that, but I do think that was a little bit of a hint, a little bit of a wink of what's to come. I think by mid-May, we will both know who the Pac-12 media partners will be for the first window here of the new era of the Pac-12, as well as who the new additions will be. And we've debated the hypotheticals 8 million times. I want Memphis and I want UNLV. I think those are the best two options. I think if you do that, you firmly handicap both the AAC and the Mountain West. It's not even a debate about what the fifth best football league is. Already in a tremendous position in terms of basketball. 7 of the 8 members or whatever have made the NCAA tournament in the last couple of years. I mean, they're in a really good spot for hoops, but you've got to make a splash here. I understand the arguments behind Texas State. I think a lot of them are oversimplified. Yes, it's great to be in Texas, but really, what is the audience there for Texas State? I don't know. To me, they feel a little bit overblown, but if you could get Memphis, I mean, that's the final dagger in the AAC, which was already handicapped pretty brutally when they took 4 teams after Texas and Oklahoma left for the SEC. And obviously, UNLV is basically supposed to be the focal point of the future of the Mountain West. So if you're able to steal them away, to me at that point, that ends any honest discussion about those leagues being even close. It's not even close now, but at that point, like, what do you have left to argue? UNLV and their bright future is what everybody loves to focus on. Another one that I think is a little bit overblown, but I do think Vegas makes a ton of sense given the way that the city is kind of leaned into sports in the last 10 to 15 years, and the fact that it would basically put the Mountain West in a really tough spot. And I'm not rooting against the Mountain West, but if you're the Pac-12, like, you're trying to win this battle here, and adding UNLV would be a major move. Before we get out of here, I did want to say that my thoughts, my prayers are with the Willis family. Dan Willis unfortunately passed away. Saw that trending on social media within the CSU circles yesterday. Dan he supported my work for as long as I can remember, going back to a decade ago when I started off at the Collegian. There's a small little cohort of Ram fans that have legitimately been with me since I was 20 years old, and about a month from turning 30, and I wouldn't be here today if it weren't for people like Dan who believed in me and were willing to, invest their time. They're just willing to support my content. And we lost a really great Ram fan. He's somebody who always stuck out in the stands, infamously wore the CSU blazer every game. Every interaction I ever had with him online or in person was just a pleasure. He was very upbeat all the time, a true optimist, which is, if you follow me, I try and lean more into the optimistic viewpoint than just constant pessimism. I think there's far too much of that out there from a sports content standpoint, but just in the world in general. Like, you've got enough negative BS out there. You don't need me being Mr. Doom and Gloom every day of the week as well. I'm gonna miss engaging with him, and I'm glad that I got to have a nice conversation with him out at the Mountain West tournament. I'm glad that he got to see that championship in person and a really fun NCAA tournament. I'm glad he got to see CSU go back to a bowl game, and I'm really thankful for everything. So this episode goes out to him, thinking of his family. Much love, y'all. Always proud to be. Peace.
We all silly like the mayor.